with a BA in Biology and Art from Knox College, Galesburg, Illinois, and an MS in Zoology from Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois. He is adjunct faculty at DePaul University in Chicago and a senior environmental resource specialist at Christopher B. Burke Engineering. In addition, Robert provides professional services to those who have paternal, maternal, and autosomal DNA results and need assistance and easy to understand interpretation. And now I'm going to turn our program over to Robert. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. As you can see, I'm off the coast of Capri in Italy. Just flew in to have this presentation and make sure you have a wonderful time today. So let's get started. So today is going to be a series of presentations, and the first one is called and by the way, Amy, thank you for the wonderful introduction, and Tricia, thank you for running things so smoothly. So I'm sure we're going to get a couple more people coming in, and that's fine. Amy tells me we've got about 45 people that have registered for this, and I think that's wonderful. I am going to start with the basics of DNA testing for Ancestry. And it's important that we cover this kind of in order so that everything makes a little bit more sense. So like any of my classes or any of the presentations that I have, think of it as we're boarding a train, and the train starts out slow and then gathers speed over time. And this is what we're doing. Okay, as Amy introduced me, I'm Robert Slowinski. I live in Rushville, Indiana. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I moved down here 5 years ago. I have done presentations all over the Midwest, in Michigan, in Illinois and Indiana. And my clients that I have because of the internet are global. So typically people do DNA tests to find family or find out more about their ethnicity or their genetic background. My initial foray into the DNA testing arena was because my family tree was relatively small. And I wanted to find out more information about that because I felt that I needed to expand that family tree, and it would be good to learn more about my ancestors, because knowing where you come from allows you to have a better idea who you are and then where are you going forward to. In the photo on the screen, there is on the left-hand side, my father and my mother on the left portion, and my aunt is on the right side in the photo. Know for certain that my father was one lucky man, marrying my mother. And by the way, she is actually shorter than my mother. It is because of the hairstyles at the time. She was able to appear taller. So my aunt was there presiding at their, I guess, wedding that they had, and that this is kind of like a starting point. And any type of family tree, you start with the parents and start moving back. On the right-hand side, there is a portrait of a number of ladies. The lady in the center, I should say, I'm sorry, the one on the right-hand side top is my mother's mother, and her name is Vanda. And the lady on the left standing, woman, is her sister. The lady sitting is Vanda's mother, Paulina, and she's holding another son in her lap. This will come as, we'll look at these photos a little bit later in another portion of the presentation. When we look at mitochondrial DNA or maternal DNA. But these are the things that everybody does doing genealogy to basically build up their family tree and provide as many documents as possible so that people in the future can see how interesting and how wonderful their family is. Hold on a second here. There we go. So why do you test your DNA? Well, some people want to know about their geographical origins and genetic groups. Less and less that's happening now because of autosomal DNA testing. But some people want to learn about how genetic groups moved around the world and essentially to provide insight into your deep ancestral history. This is a little bit outside genealogy, but what it does is provides a background of where you have come from and what your ancestors may have gone through to get where you are today. For genealogical research, it's there basically to assist with your family tree. It is one more tool you can use to create the possibilities of finding lost relatives. And if you're doing paternal DNA studies for your father's line, you can compare surnames to others of the same surname. DNA testing has been used to potentially break down some brick walls in your research. However, let's see if I can admit somebody here. However, you have to keep an open mind when doing a DNA testing. There might be some things you might not want to find out, or a specific question you are trying to find out about perhaps your great-great-grandfather and more information about him. The DNA may not exactly help you out right away with that. So it may take some time, and a little patience will help prevail. Okay. I hope that this looks a little bit familiar to you as far as the family tree goes. I've made it a little bit more colorful for talking points. Now, when we look at this, I'm going to say, okay, the question is, what lineages are followed with YDNA, mtDNA, or autosomal? Now, all of a sudden you're saying, Robert, hold on a second, back up here. What is this jargon and mumbo jumbo you're talking about? Well, hold on a second here. Let's go back and define a couple of things. The idea is that the more you know about DNA testing, the more you know about the words and language used, the more empowered you're going to be. So YDNA is based on the Y chromosome. That is the DNA that makes men men. Not all men beat their chest, but it does help having the YDNA to do so. YDNA is the Y chromosome, and ladies, just to let you know, out of the 23 chromosome, the YDNA chromosome is a very tiny chromosome as compared to the X chromosome of women. Now, both men have X and Y, but for some reason, the YDNA, which everybody thought would probably be a very large DNA, is only a very small DNA as compared to the X chromosome for the ladies. mtDNA is mitochondrial DNA, and that is something that is not found in the DNA of the cell. And I'll cover more about that, where that's located, and a little bit more about that. That follows the maternal line, and autosomal is all the lines or all your cousins' lines. So let's look at the chart right here. Let's take a little bit of time with this. The red boxes on the left-hand side are the YDNA or the paternal line. That paternal line is one long, thin, linear line that basically goes from, if you are a male or female, your father your father's father, grandfather, and then your great-grandfather on your father's side. Does not include males on another branch that was your father's mother's side. So it is one thin, long ribbon in your family tree when you do a YDNA test. If you do a maternal DNA test, you are now in the pink diamonds, and that it starts out with basically both males and females have the maternal or mitochondrial DNA, whereas only men have the YDNA. Ladies, you're probably fortunate for that. The female or paternal mtDNA follows along one thin line on your family tree. Starts out with you, your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother's mother. Does not include any other maternal lines that brought them to your mother. That mtDNA has not been passed over to your mother from your grandfather's mother. So this is one long, thin, linear line that goes in there. Autosomal DNA essentially is all the DNA directly associated with you through not only your mother's line, father's line, but also all the other cousins that came into play, or grandparents, great-grandparents from other lineages. Okay, let me go back here. That basically DNA is what you are typically testing with the autosomal tests with Ancestry DNA, FamilyTree DNA, Family Finder, Relative Finder with 23andMe and a couple of other different companies, including things like MyHeritage and Living DNA. Some companies will test the YDNA as well as mtDNA and then autosomal DNA. So just to make sure it's clear, the red line here is the YDNA line, paternal. The pink line over here is the mtDNA or mitochondrial DNA. And that is one long linear line. And the rest is the autosomal that all link together to you. Okay, let's proceed and see where is this DNA located. So autosomal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and Y chromosomal DNA. So this is kind of an artist's rendition of a human cell, courtesy of my drawing skills. And let's say this looks like an egg in the frying pan. Already hungry for breakfast already. The yolk in the middle is the nucleus of the cell. And the inside of the cell is the cytoplasm. And the Y chromosome is located in the nucleus as well as all the rest of the chromosomes. There are 23 pairs. But the mitochondrial DNA, let me see if I can get a pointer over here. Yes, I can. There we go. Mitochondrial DNA. So let's go back. The nucleus is in the center. It houses the YDNA and the rest of the chromosomes. The cytoplasm is the material inside the cell. And the mitochondrial DNA is outside the cell. The mitochondria are little tiny organelles within the cell that I bet you when you woke up this morning, you didn't think you'd get a biology lesson, but that's okay. The mitochondrial DNA, I kind of think of them as little tiny Polish sausages or kielbasas. And think of them as energy plants. They're little power plants in the cell. So all the food that you eat basically gets turned into energy for each cell because it has to be broken down. You break it down in your stomach, break it down in intestines, and it keeps on breaking down to the point where it gets shipped to all the different parts of the body where that energy is then used to power the cell because the cell has specific things it has to do. And one of the things is to multiply as well. So this is kind of an idea of where the DNA that you're using or testing comes from. Okay. We're going to be looking at a couple of different testing companies and what they test for, and kind of give you an idea what you might expect from them. So this is a review, and the top 3 of the DNA testing companies. And by the way, I do not get paid by any of these DNA testing companies. I am a volunteer administrator through FamilyTree DNA for the Slowinski project, the H2MT DNA project, and the Viking and Germanic project. So, but they don't pay me to do that. It's all volunteer time. 23andMe is another company. MyHeritage, Genographic 2.0, Living DNA, and GPS Origins. And I recently took off a company called Ethnicity because of the things going on with the pandemic. That company decided to fold and start a new branch. It's more of a think tank for DNA testing. That was started by Dr. Spencer Wells, and he was previously in charge of the Genographic project at National Geographic. Him and his staff are doing really well, and they're doing other things besides the inside of me right now. So I have actually tested with all these companies and more, but kind of give you an idea what these companies are about and what they test. So let's go. Now, a number of you people have probably gone and tested through Ancestry DNA. If you haven't tested at all with DNA, I'm just curious about what is this all about. I would suggest that people are going to say, well, Robert, what is the best company I can test for? What's the best DNA results I can get? It's kind of a split between Ancestry DNA and 23andMe. It all depends on what you are looking for. But let's take a look at what these companies offer and see if there is any reason that you should test, because your question is going to be, is it going to be useful for genealogy? So Ancestry DNA does an autosomal test. That's all the 23 chromosomes. However, every company does not look at every single little base pair on your DNA. Those are the little building blocks that, but they look at blocks of DNA because there's just so many base pairs on there that they couldn't do them all. There are some companies that have done all of them, and it's a very expensive test. But the normal, anywhere to $69 to $99 test looks at blocks of DNA rather than for the entire genome. You will get results for your autosomal test. It will also provide you with ethnicity results. And in the last couple of years, they've updated their ethnicity results several times, and I'll go over that in the ethnicity estimate presentation later on today. You do get DNA matches, and they'll give you an indication of what potential relationship they are to you, whether it's a close immediate family or first, second, third cousin, fourth cousin, distant cousin. And because Ancestry is so into family trees and genealogy, is it useful for genealogy? I say a resounding yes. So this is kind of a page that I have. It shows ethnicity estimate you could get for your DNA story, your DNA matches, and then this is a little bit older. I have an updated one that used to have DNA circles and now has through lines. And we'll go into more of that a little bit later. Now, ethnicity estimates basically have changed a little bit, and I'll go over that, but this is kind of a little bit of a brief thing, but that shows what potential areas or regions, and sometimes countries of origins you have for your DNA results. Now mine is mostly Eastern European, and I think we'll go through FamilyTree DNA as well. I have a little bit of a story for that. So it shows that majority of my ethnicity estimate, and this cells also already has changed, is over 90% Eastern European, with a little bit of Scandinavian, a little bit of European West, Finland, Northwest Russia, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. The interesting thing about the ethnicity estimates at Ancestry is that they'll also go through some timelines of the 1800s, 1825, to show movements from Europe, if you have European ancestry, to the Americas, and that we'll look a little bit at that a little bit later. Okay, FamilyTree DNA. This is a company based out of Houston, Texas. Bennett Greenspan is the president of the company. They do autosomal testing. It's called Family Finder. They also do an annual conference. I don't think they have one this year, maybe it was virtual, for people who are volunteer administrators to learn more about how to be better administrators and have lots of DNA presentations, talk about ethnicity, talk about YDNA, mtDNA, and things like that. They offer a lot of different things. Family Finder's that autosomal test, just like Ancestry DNA. And if you want to, and I'll probably mention this again, have tested with Ancestry and tested or with 23andMe, you can take your raw data and transfer it over to FamilyTree DNA, and you get some initial free matches and look at your ethnicity estimate. But if you pay like a $20 fee, you will then get FamilyTree DNA will open up to its full database, so you can get more potential relatives to look up. They give you ethnicity results called My Origins. They also have a feature called Ancient Origins, where they check your DNA against those ancient DNA skeletons that have been found in burial sites, where they compare how much Bronze Age invader you have, agricultural person you are from the agricultural origins area, and a couple of different as well as anything outside of Europe in this case. So they do YDNA testing, which is the paternal test, the mtDNA testing, maternal, and these are all a la carte. The YDNA, mtDNA is separate from the autosomal testing. This allows you to do some testing and then go back if you want to learn some more. Is it useful for genealogy? Yes, it is. So a little bit about Family Finder. There's an origins place. Now you saw my origins or ethnicity result from Ancestry. My family is from this area. Both sides kind of gives you an idea. But it shows essentially Eastern Europe is my origin for my ethnicity. I had a colleague of mine who was a Slowinski, but they changed their name to when they came to the United States. And he said, Robert, I've never seen anybody with just one ethnicity. He said, Robert, you're a thoroughbred. I thought about this for a second. I said, maybe, Paul, I'm more of an inbred. I'm not sure. So otherwise, it was very interesting to see that. But since that time where I got this one ethnicity, I've gotten some more. So I may not be the thoroughbred that Paul thinks I am. Let me see here. For YDNA, you can get matches, and these are 25 marker matches. When doing YDNA testing, they have a certain number of markers that you can test. Robert, what is a marker? A marker is like a street address. It's a location on your YDNA or the Y chromosome that is a specific location that geneticists can go back to and test other people at that exact same address or location. And then they compare your results to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those results would be. Those would be considered, the markers would have STR or standard tandem repeats. I'll go over this a little bit later, but those are locations where the DNA has been replicated multiple times and gives you a value. So when you get your results for marker 198, let's say, you will get a number of 13. That means at that location, you have 13 repeats of that small chunk of DNA that is then compared to other men so that they can see if they're closely related or not. And the number of differences they have is basically shows them that they have a common ancestor a little bit further back in time. So to show you on this here, I am the white balloon over here. That's where my paternal ancestry is from, just southwest of Warsaw, Poland. And the majority of these matches are not exact matches at 25 markers. They don't offer the 25 marker test, but I want to show you because it's the most number of matches that I have. Currently, when you do an YDNA test, you will have 37 markers as your baseline, then 67 markers, then 111. Now, there also is a test called the Big Y, and that goes well over 500. It could be up to 700, depending on what test you take. But these are tests that you can take to then compare your paternal surname to others of the same surname. Now, when you get your results, the results may not be the exact same surname again. So right now in this image, we have most people that are 1 or 2 steps away from me at 25 markers. And that could be essentially 1 to 2 steps at that lower level. Could mean anywhere from just 200 to 500 years apart. Depends. And you're thinking to yourself, when I mention numbers like that, you're saying, Robert, how am I going to do this genealogically? Well, that's why you have to focus on those individuals that are much closely related to you, like looking at exact matches or 1 step, maybe 2 steps, depending on how large of a data sample you use for your DNA. Let's move on here. Okay. Now I'm looking at my maternal matches. This is the mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. There are 3 levels to do this testing. There's HVR1. HVR stands for hypervariable region. This is a part of the mitochondrial DNA that kind of changes, or what's called mutates, faster than the rest of it. I'll explain that mtDNA later is a circle, basically, of DNA, and it's called a plasmid. Now, if you can see right here that I'm at HVR1 related to most of the world, and trying to track down who I'm actually more closely related to would take me more than the rest of my life. So let's go and upgrade that test to the base. This is the basic test. Let's go up 1 level to HVR2. Now we have limited this to Europe instead. In my case, I am again the little white balloon here. This is the maternal, my maternal line location of ancestry. And if you notice that majority of the matches at HVR2 are in Northwestern Europe. There's some in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, a little bit in South. But it is interesting enough, a lot of them are in the northern portion of Europe. Well, that's still quite a number of people to check out. Let's see, I'm going to go 1 step higher. I'm going to do the full mitochondrial test. And these are the matches I got for the FGS. Now, there is a number of people that are in the United States, but there's also a number of people there's a lot more people testing now. I used to have a lot less of these. But if you notice on the colors, I am the white balloon over here where the red dot is. If you notice that most of them are 2 steps or 3 steps. Now, mitochondrial DNA mutates or changes rather slowly. A mutation can happen, the number is 0.0043 per generation. Let me switch that to the number of 100 years. That's 1 mutation for every 200 years. And that some mutations can happen up to 900 years. It depends on how slow that DNA mutates. So, but the mutation can happen at any time within a generation to pass on to the next. So I have a chance to look at some people that basically are 2 steps away, which means probably in the 400-year range from me, that I would have to do some genealogical research. We'll look at mitochondrial DNA in the following presentation. This is just to kind of give you an idea of what types of things you might get. Now, each of these little balloons also has text associated with it, and you get a list of people. And I just wanted to show you a graphic interpretation of where they are located based on what they put down on their profile. Let's move to 23andMe. They have an autosomal test. Relative finder is what they're calling it. They do, let me see here. YDNA test results, mtDNA test results, Neanderthal results, and they have matches, but those are for autosomal only. Now, take this with a grain of salt for the YDNA and mtDNA results. They tend to be mostly the results without the actual DNA STRs or the numbers that you would get with FamilyTree DNA. They just tell you what genetic group you belong to. Now, each genetic group is called a haplogroup. And so my haplogroup that I belong to is R1A. R1A are considered the Indo-Europeans. There are many men that are R1B, which is a branch of the Indo-European group as well, but they're mostly in Northwestern and Western Europe. Now, the mtDNA results they will provide you with is just the genetic group you belong to and a little bit about the travels that group has taken over time. You will get a little bit of information about your Neanderthal results. And these are the number of variants that you carry. I believe it is the maximum you can have is about 4% Neanderthal, but typically people have is about 2% or less. They also provide you with information about your matches. Again, autosomal only. Is this useful for genealogy? Yes, but there is limited research you have to do on that. It's limited on the research because the autosomal results, they only provide you with the results. They don't really give you access to their family trees. You have to contact them directly. Okay, so according to 23andMe, my Neanderthal ancestry results, I have 295 variants, which puts me in the category of like 90th percentile of amount of DNA, of Neanderthal DNA. Now, in the last number of years, the Neanderthal DNA has been found within majority of Northern Europeans. There are some African groups that are now showing that they have Neanderthal DNA, but most of the time it's been associated with Asia and North Europe, European ancestry. And they're still working on the genetics and about that. You can do other test sites to find more about your Neanderthal ancestry and also find out more about what types of variants and basically traits or conditions that the Neanderthal had that is now in our DNA as well. The maternal haplogroup they assigned me was H2A2A. H2A2A. It is an alphanumeric system that they're using to that, and they also now use an end mutation or SNP. Oh, I'm getting into complicated words here. They basically end the, let's say the paternal haplogroup used to be called R1A. Now I've been booked into our M512 is the last mutation that they were able to uncover. Other companies have gone much further on the genetic family tree. So the M512 is a branch. If you had the main trunk of a tree, like a family tree, that is the R group right there. And each branch from them is a mutation or change from the original R. And so my branch or limb is M512. Now, they're saying basically my ancestry composition is mostly Eastern European. We talked a little bit about that. And just a smidge of Jewish. So probably accounts for my loving of bagels. This kind of gives you an idea what the map might look like for the different ethnicities. And no matter what, I keep on ending up being 100% me. Okay, MyHeritage is another site that it is based in Israel. They do autosomal testing. They provide ethnicity results, which are limited, matches. However, this is the catch. Most of the companies, once you pay for the test, you're pretty much on board and get the results and all the access to everything. MyHeritage is not like that. MyHeritage is limited to subscriptions. So once you get your test, you'll have a certain amount of time to look at the results. But after you want to start looking for more in-depth results to the website, then what happens is that you need to pay, and it's a monthly fee that they have, similar to Ancestry DNA, Ancestry tests, Ancestry.com requires as well. Is it useful for genealogy? Yes, it is. And especially for Eastern European, Central European ancestry, if you have that. There are some places that specialize in specific regions within global communities. So this is one of them that I've been able to see many Eastern European results matches for myself. Phenographic 2.0. This used to be run by the National Geographic company. However, they've changed ownership and now it is run by helix.com. It is based in the United States. It is an autosomal test, but it also has results for YDNA, mtDNA. It has an ethnicity estimate, migration maps, a percentage Neanderthal. However, it provides you with no matches whatsoever. Is it useful for genealogy? No, not really. What it is useful for is basically coffee talk or coffee table information. So you can talk and compare percentage Neanderthal, what your paternal DNA is, and things like that. Let's see what else I've got covered on. Okay, I'll cover that more of the results on that later in a presentation. Another company that does testing is called Living DNA. They are based in England. If you have European and or English, British, Irish heritage or ancestry, this is a company that has a lot of data associated with those areas in the northwestern part of Europe. They have extensive data sets that do sub-regions within the British Isles to give you more of an idea where your ancestry is from. This is the first time I tested with DNA test a couple years ago, and they basically got it right. Eastern European, Great Britain and Ireland came up, and North and West, and European South, I can understand. But the Great Britain and Ireland, I wasn't so sure of, because I'm like, you never know, testing. Since then, they've changed it, and they've updated their reference panels, and they've basically put me in what the other companies have put me with my ethnicity. They have autosomal tests, YDNA results, just the results as far as what group you belong to, your maternal DNA results, just what group you belong to, and your ethnicity results as well. So the new matches section has come out so that you have matches that you can compare to and contact. Is it useful for genealogy? Limited, but it's getting better. GPS origins, essentially based in the United States. And what caught my eye was it said, pinpoint your ancestry. GPS origins offers DNA results with a level of specificity no other test can replicate. Discover your true story. I was hooked. I was hooked. I needed to see what this test gave me as far as my ancestry. And I'll cover that also in the ethnicity estimate. But this is a little bit of a snippet of what I found out. It is an autosomal test, but I wasn't sure. It kind of mentioned something about YDNA or paternal side and maternal side, but I really wasn't sure. But they give you ethnicity estimates and this really interesting migration map. This is where my DNA has gone. I'll cover this a little bit more later. However, there are no matches associated with this. And is it useful for genealogy? No, not at all. Okay. It's just about 10 o'clock. Is that about right? Or my, yeah. And this is the first presentation. If you have any questions, and Amy can chime in here, please go to the chat portion of this and write your questions, and then Amy can read them off. Amy,
actually,
back to
this
you.
is Trish, and
Oh,
I'm
hi,
going to go
Trish.
ahead and read them off for you.
Okay.
Angel asked, how much does it cost to do a DNA test?
Okay. Typically, DNA tests are a lot lower than they used to be, and they range anywhere between $69 to $99 for a basic test, mostly autosomal, which is all basically uncovers your cousins. If you do a YDNA test, that is over $100, between $100 and $200. And for a maternal DNA test, it's usually around between $100 and $250 for something like that, depending what company you test with. Now, if you do autosomal testing, that $49, $69. Now they're going on sale pretty soon, and so you'll get a good discount. Ancestry DNA does that cousins test, 23andMe, and MyHeritage. You'll get some other information as well, and FamilyTree DNA as well. If you want to do specifically your paternal line only or your maternal line only, right now the best place is FamilyTree DNA, because you will actually get the results back, and it's a lot easier to interpret when I can actually see the markers and what the results for each of the markers is. Provides a lot easier for interpretation.
Thank you. I have another one, is any opinions on, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Genie Annette? They spelled it
No, it's, yeah, I have not heard of Genie Annette, so I can't provide any constructive criticism on that. So I know there are some other companies and or organizations, they've been popping up regularly. I have not seen that one specifically.
I don't know if you can help this one right now. My mother's mother, her grandmother was adopted. She is my brick wall. Which company would help me with this?
Okay. Since it is a maternal DNA line, you can do one of two things. Ancestry DNA has the largest database. That's one choice. The other choice is if you want to go through the maternal line to find out specific maternal ancestors, then FamilyTree DNA, the mitochondrial or mtDNA test would be helpful. Start out with Ancestry, and then if you hit some other brick walls, you have an alternative to try the maternal DNA test. It's a little bit more complicated using the mtDNA, but sometimes you can find a maternal line where, again, you're looking for people who have a larger family tree, so that if you can dovetail into them by being a DNA match, it'll be helpful. The Ancestry DNA test will not tell you right away if it's your maternal or paternal side. So you may have to do some contacting of matches to see if your connection is on that. But your mtDNA is definitely only on the maternal side, so that any connection, if you have, and you have to have an exact match. As a match, basically it says 0 for mutations, and then you can potentially contact that person. Now here's a word of advice. Everybody wants to test to find out about their DNA, ethnicity, potential cousins, whatever they have. Not everybody wants to respond to an email from a cousin they don't know. So you have to be very tactful about this, and I'll cover more about this in a later presentation. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have several here, and if you're going to cover them later, just
Sure.
say that and I'll go over them.
Oh, sure.
We can skip them. Forgive me if I missed or misunderstood the explanation, but if autosomal, I don't know if I pronounced that right, covers
Autosomal, yes.
everything, autosomal, why do we need Y and MT?
Well, I guess that's what Ancestry DNA used to have, YDNA and mtDNA, because the mtDNA and YDNA tests are so specific to that one line that if you are doing, let's say, a paternal surname study, if you have a surname like Smith, Brown, Jones, things like that, and there's a lot of them, you want to know which line, a paternal line you are, because there could be many that have the same surname but are different genetically. You also want to find out through a paternal DNA test, not paternity, paternal or YDNA test, because sometimes surnames change over time, whether it's a non-paternity event or there's an adoption, and that surname does change. And it does happen. I found out myself that my great-grandfather was given up to adoption at the Polish Catholic Church. He was my brick wall. I had a genealogist help me out, and from Canada, and she was able to find out what happened to my great-grandfather and where he came from, and that he was given up as an orphan to the Catholic Church, and basically took on the surname with the family that he was adopted by and became a servant to, and took on the Slowinski surname. But our family's had that surname for over 160 years now. But I'm using YDNA testing to find out potentially what is my original surname prior to that. I'm still working on that. I have a couple leads. mtDNA as well to find out, and I will cover that more in depth about why you use those and how fruitful those studies can be. I guess I'll talk about that later. Next question.
Okay, what can I tell people who are afraid to test their DNA because they're afraid the government will use their results?
Okay. Each testing company and everybody's individual decision on that is their own. There are people that do not wish to do that. Majority of the time, it has been not only just been thinking about that the government may use that, but they think that people will clone them. And I wouldn't mind a couple extra me's because I get a lot more work done. But the companies, first of all, they don't have the expertise yet to do something like that. The other thing is that there are privacy policies within each organization and company that does the testing. You need to read those carefully, and then you need to check those privacy boxes as soon as you need to or want to. I've shared my DNA results with a couple of different projects. Some of them have been very far-reaching in the genetic genealogy community, but you can choose not to. And you can choose that if there's an administrator, you can have limited access for that administrator. Let's say FamilyTree DNA. But there are a lot of privacy issues that the companies are taking into consideration. However, there has been a mainstream issue regarding law enforcement gaining access to some of the third-party websites. And occasionally, they'll ask some of the major companies to have access. Those companies usually fight tooth and nail to keep their information of the patrons private. There are potential for injunctions by the court to try to get the data, but mostly it's to very specific information that they want, and it's not from everybody. It may be from a specific line. Majority of the time, if you enter your DNA results, your autosomal results, into a third-party website called GEDmatch, there have been some law enforcement searches in GEDmatch to locate, let's say, serial killers and things like that, and have been very successfully. They won't necessarily name you as the person, but it may be someone on your line. I know that there has been some indication that if the people who are of Northern European descent that have cousins on GEDmatch, and if you've done a terrible crime, you may be found on that. But most of those people who have done the crimes do not do DNA testing. So the idea is that the government going to do anything about it? It may associate with investigations associated with criminal activity, but not with the private testing companies. It's usually when you provide your DNA to outside third-party companies that may be an issue. But if you are like, hey, I talked to some person I cared about very much, and they said basically, if one of my cousins caused tremendous amount of had murders and things like that, they need to go to jail. So that would be something that they would gladly provide their DNA results to a testing company or a third-party company to help find those bad people. But it's everybody's individual right to say no about that. But the privacy settings on these testing companies are very good. They're vetted very carefully by their lawyers at each of these companies because they want to keep customers. Any other questions?
It's not really, well, it is a question, but I can answer it, but I will answer it as we are recording this session. So as long as that recording goes well and we're able to retrieve it, then we will share the recording on probably our YouTube page. And I'm not sure if Amy will be able to, it's going to be since this is such a long session, it will probably be a big file. So you'll have to probably access it online somewhere is my guess. And then we have had a few people asking about handouts. So I don't know if there are handouts that you have, or I've just been encouraging people that we are recording and that they should possibly take notes.
In the near future, if the library wishes to have, I can send a 1 or 2 page handout, but you would have to have email addresses to everybody to send that, to forward them to that, but I don't have any today.
That sounds
because-
great. Thank you.
Mhm.